Good morning. God blesses you right where you are and where he calls you to go. Hopefully, the audio on this one is actually working. I think I fixed it. I'm not sure. If not, I'm going to lose my mind. For the literal love of God, I hope it works. No, that's not it. All right. So last time we were in Genesis chapter 26, this previous Monday, and that's where we're going to be today. And we're picking up on verse 12, which is right after where Abimelech pretty much announces that, hey, if anyone touches Isaac's wife, they will be put to death. And I said that was interesting last time because his father did the same thing when he went to Egypt. And the Pharaoh was like, why'd you do that, Abraham? You've put a curse on all of us, because he lied and said that his wife was his sister, and his son did the same exact thing. And I talked about how there are some habits that go through like the genealogy of a family, and it's like a family curse, basically. Like, let's say if your dad or mom's a drunk and you become a drunk, or if you have a certain sort of stance or opinion to something or some subject matter, that perhaps you inherit that from your father or mother, or maybe your grandfather, or people just influence you, the way people influence you, period. And it's interesting how it creates cycles, right? And God's aware of these cycles for sure. And so I'm going to be picking up in verse 12 today. And I hope this reaches you well whenever it does. And if anyone happens to pop in, that's cool. I've been extremely busy in my programming endeavors. God's really like opening doors there that I've been praying for a long time. And he's been opening doors in other areas. Ever since I got that concussion back last March, it's almost been a year now. My thinking has been better now than it's ever been. My memory is probably better now than maybe ever, even before I got the concussion. But my symptoms are minimizing, and it's crazy. And they're very minor anyway. But I'm the type of person where I'm so particular in details and stuff that if something's just a little bit off, I'll just like lose my mind and get really obsessed with it. I'm the same way programmatically too. Like as a programmer, when I get an assignment for a certain request to do something, when I go to create the program and code it, I have to know why I'm coding what I'm coding, and why the functionality that I'm implementing into our whole system, so to speak, what the purpose of it is and what that connects to and tethers to. Otherwise, it causes me to stumble, and it causes me to get kind of hung up in the tripwires. Like I have to see the big picture, and it's so weird. But I think that's just how God's wired me, because I want to be an architect. I'm going to be an architect someday. And I don't, what kind of architect will be, well, that's a conversation for another time. I don't know exactly yet, but it really aids me in knowing like the business perspective of like the programs that I code. And if I don't, it's so weird how that translates over. Like I need to know the why to things. I don't know if it's just because I'm so investigative or what. Hey, good morning, Steve. How are we doing this morning? You doing well? I hope you've been doing well. I heard Russ, I seen in the chat, our little men chat, that Russ got half custody again with his kids, and that's amazing. God's so good. That's something he probably been praying about for years, and it just happens, which is a good lesson for people that when you're in a scenario that it looks like nothing can change, it can change in an instant, right? And it's so wild. All right, before I go down too many rabbit holes, start off in verse. I'll just start 11. So it says, so Abimelech gave orders to all the people. Anyone who molests this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. So that's where I left off last time. And then in 12, it says, Isaac, this is where we'll begin. Isaac planted crops in that land, and the same year reaped 100-fold, because the Lord blessed him. The man became rich and his wealth continued to grow until he became very wealthy. He had so many flocks and herds and servants that the Philistines envied him. So all the wells that his father's servants had dug at the time of his father Abraham, the Philistines stopped up, filling them with earth. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Move away from us. You have become far too powerful for us." So Isaac moved away from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. Isaac reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham died, and he gave them the names his father had given them. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and discovered a well of fresh water there. But the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen and said, "The water is ours." So he named the well Esek, which in my Bible it says Esek means dispute, because they disputed with him. Then they dug another well, but they quarreled over that one also. So he named it Sitnah. He moved on from there and dug another well, and no one quarreled over it. He named it Rehoboth, saying, "Now the Lord has given us room, and we will flourish in the land." From there he went up to Beersheba that night. The Lord appeared to him and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you, and I will increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." Isaac built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord. There he pitched his tent, and there his servants dug a well. Meanwhile, Abimelech had come to him from Gerar with Ahazoth, his personal advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his forces. Isaac asked them, "Why have you come to me, since you were hostile to me and sent me away?" You can only stay for 15 minutes, Steve? That's fine. That's good. I appreciate you coming and saying hi. What was your video about? I hope it was good. I like how we see here in well, I'm going to finish first and then I'll start. Isaac asked them, "Why have you come to me, since you were hostile to me and sent me away?" They answered, "We saw clearly that the Lord was with you," we said. There ought to be a sworn agreement between us and you. Let us make a treaty with you that you will do us no harm, just as we did not molest you, but always treated you well and sent you away in peace. And now you are blessed by the Lord. Isaac then made a feast for them, and they ate and drank. Early the next morning, the men swore on oath to each other. Then Isaac sent them on their way, and they left him in peace. That day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well they had dug. They said, "We found water." He called it Sheba, and to this day the name of the town has been Beersheba. When Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and also Basemath, daughter of Elon the Hittite. They were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. And that's the end of the chapter. So the first thing I notice is we see Isaac is planting crops in the land that's next to this king, Abimelech. And the Lord starts blessing him so much that the people that are close to him in proximity in regards to the territory, they're probably becoming jealous, for one. And for two, it seems like his resources are probably starting to siphon the resources away from them as well. Because when you grow, you have to expand and you're taking up land and whatnot. And it says in verse 14, he had so many flocks and herds and servants that the Philistines envied him. So they were jealous of him. So all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of his father Abraham, the Philistines stopped up, filling them with earth. So all these wells that his father had dug earlier, which, hey, good morning. Morning, Sharice. You've been doing a lot of work on YouTube. It's been great, actually. And it's interesting how this goes into the same conversation I was having on Monday, wherein the cycles of families and like family curses, I guess, quote unquote, where he's doing the same exact actions that his fathers did, or very similar, in the manner where he's using the wells that his father had dug already, right? And then the enemy of the territory, they come in and stop him up because they're jealous of him. And it's interesting how these like cycles repeat throughout family bloodlines and heritage over and over again until someone has to come and then change it, right? And it's usually really painful to change that. Or at least it has to be really uncomfortable because, well, if you know your parents, they're the people that raise you directly, right? They have the biggest influence over you, over anybody for a long period of time. And, or whoever they be, whether, let's say you don't have parents or let's say you're in an orphanage or something, you probably have some sort of ideological parent in your head, or it could be God, for instance, which I would argue that it probably should be God over everything. But, well, it's not even should be. It not even probably should be. It just should be. But you're always going to have this like, icon that is also a standard in your mind that you're always striving towards all the time. And then if that icon is a person, the actions that they took, following in their footsteps is much easier than walking in a path that is your own and creating your own footsteps in a new path and then stumbling upon new things and encountering new traps and tripwires that your parents haven't encountered because you don't really know how to interact with them because you haven't heard about it before, right? Or at least there's a comfortability and a peace that comes with doing something that your father or mother have already done, because you can kind of gauge the results. It's like in science when you're experimenting and let's say you're doing something that you already know the studies on, you already know the results like relatively. And so it's not going to be like a big shock when your results of your like experiment are going to be the same that already happened like in a previous time, right? If you're running the same experience, and then you add new, factors and variables into the mix, and that's when you bring about new stuff, which is like tweaking it. But sometimes God will call you to absolutely walk on a completely new path that you've never even heard about before or seen someone else do, and you'd have no idea how to interact with it. And that's when I really think that's when the relationship you have with God comes into. That's definitely when it comes into like big key moments in your life when you don't know the reference for this, and you can go to people and seek advice, but none of it really will give you as much comfort as just knowing that God is presently with you in the moment and that he's guiding you no matter what. Because just like here, when we see in the story later on, it's Isaac moved away from the area when the people that were with Abimelech and they were stopping up his wells, getting jealous. He goes to the wells that were dug in the time of his father Abraham, and the Philistines already stopped them up after Abraham died. And he keeps going to these new wells, and it keeps causing more volatility and friction in his life. And finally, we see God come through and then act through that king Abimelech and meet with him. And he's like, hey, we need to make a treaty, right? So God will fix the thing that it really didn't look like anything was going to fall through for him or go in his way, I don't think at all. And it's so interesting to me. It's really hard to move away from following a plan that someone's given you and they're like, I know this works because I used it. Because not every plan is like, hey, what's up, Rock? Not every plan that someone else uses is going to work for you at all. Because God creates us in a unique manner that is specific to us and our calling that he's given us. And just like Isaac here, he has to like keep moving because the territory and the inhabitants of the territory that he's in are really volatile and contentious with him. And he keeps saying, like in verse 21, it's like they dug another well, but they quarreled over that one also. So he named it Sitnah. He moved on from there and dug another well. And finally, no one quarreled over that one. He named it Rehoboth, saying, now the Lord has given us room and we will flourish in the land. So he just kept moving along in the path that God was like guiding him to go until he finally got a place where everything was peaceful. Well, peaceful, right? I don't know if, well, peaceful's, yes, you can have absolute peace amidst chaos with God for sure. But usually the definition of peace that most people aggregate to, it's like, I don't know, that's complicated. Peace is a complicated thing. Most of it's internal, despite your, external environment. That's when you have true peace, is when when you're cognizant of God being with you all the time, despite what is going on around you at all. And it seems like God honored the faith that Isaac had from moving to spot and not letting the friction, and not letting the fights and the quarrels and the setbacks of these people being cruel to him directly. He just kept moving on, kept being guided by God, and he finally makes another well, and no one quarrels over this one, so he stops, and he thinks, now the Lord has given us room and we will flourish in the land. And then it says he goes up to Beersheba that night. The Lord appeared to him and said, I am the God your father. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and increase your number and increase your ascendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. And this, we see the same manner of messaging, interacting, and communication that happened with his father, where this is a very similar story to what happened to his father when he went to Egypt and did just along his way in his journey. And I wonder if that says that there's always going to be cyclical patterns in our family's history, both positive and negative, no matter what. Because God loves patterns. Like, if you read the Bible, there's tons of symbology in the patterns that are in the Bible. And a lot of the character arcs in the stories, they have similar patterns, like father, son, just like here. And I love how after Isaac receives messaging from God and is talking to him, he stops to build an altar. Like I spoke on that last time, is he stops everything he's doing and builds an altar to God, which stops him from getting lost in the blessings that God has given him, which I think is really prominent, especially today, where you can be praying for something for so long and then it'll actually happen. And this huge blessing lands in your lap that you, without the help of God, you're not really, it wouldn't have came to fruition to begin with. And you're not really qualified for it anyway. But what Jesus did on the cross, like his blood that he shed, qualifies you for it, because you are now, it's like you're calling upon the sacrificial, ritualistic act of Jesus when blessings are coming to fruition in your life and they just land in your lap because you're finally being cognizant of the fact that God's like with you all the time. And he's like, he sees that you're at a place in the relationship with him where you're able to handle this blessing. And sometimes people with their free will, they get it wrong, and they can start just they can start immersing themselves in all the perks and the benefits of the blessing that God has given them, and start to lose sight of why he gave it to them in the first place, which is super easy to do, because you could be doing something that is morally correct and benevolent and absolutely good to do, and everyone will praise you for it, but it could not be what God's actually wanting you to do, which is, that sucks sometimes. It just sucks sometimes. And because his perspective is different. Like, what if God called you to do something that in everyone else's perspective is not really a big deal, but you're so good at it that God's like using it. And it might be some like, you know, little sequence of events that happen, and it'll cause this like chain reaction that'll go down the line and be able to affect people in a certain manner. Like someone will see you doing it, and it'll click something on in their head, and then they'll start doing it. And it's like this big webway network of people with their callings. And it's really, really amazing. And it speaks to God's power, how us being his creation, it's like the world's this big like palette, you know, and he's like this artist drawing everything on there. And it's really beautiful to think about. And we have to like set down our own personal opinions of things and our own personal grading of things when it comes to the enormity of our calling, I guess, because something that may seem really minor to someone else, you know, isn't minor to God. It's all, you know, a part of his plan. And so it's really hard not to fall into the worship of your own calling, basically, I think. Sharice says, plans work best when you have buy-in. Buy-in comes from when you are part of the plan. From biblical standpoint, we create the plan, submit it to God, and adjust as needed. I find myself asking the question a lot. God, is this what you want me to do? I find that he will not answer because he is like, I already told you, but I think he appreciates me asking. So I think a lot of scenarios like that, at least personally, I think this is biblically true as well. Sometimes God answers, sometimes he doesn't. Like that's not a viral type answer. That's not one that, you know, people clip up, but it's true. I mean, and there's a reason why he answers, and there's a reason why he's not answering. He's like intentional, right? If he's not answering, it's because, I mean, some things have to be formed within your mind and your character the hard way, and you have to find them. Like, let's say, for instance, someone gives you a piece of art. That's amazing. It's good. It touches your soul, you know? And you look at it and you see if it's a picture, you look at the canvas and you're like, that picture means something, right? And it touches you deeply. I would contrast that with, what if you took the time to create a piece of art that touched you deeply? It's completely different. Like how you look at it is going to be completely different. You're going to remember the brush strokes that it took to put on the canvas to create it. You're going to remember the late nights that you should have went to bed because you got work the next morning, but you were creating this thing that felt deeply to you for reasons that you may not fully grasp. Hey, have a good one, Steve. And thanks. I will keep going. I always keep going. It doesn't matter. This is the same thing I do every day. I just turn on record. And I appreciate you being here. I do. You keep going too. But regardless, the canvas, if you create it yourself, you have this like personal relationship to it, not just from a perspective of, this is an object that I own, but this is an object that I created, and it came from the ingenuity of my mind, you know, my own creative instinct, my own creative endeavors. My own creative spark that I created, well, that manifested in my head as I was like performing the art and enacting the actions that were needed in order to create this thing. Like, you know, all the steps and how the vision came to fruition, right? And that's completely different than something just being given to you. You appreciate it in a different manner. You see things about it differently. And I think it's the same thing with God when it comes to our lives is everyone's in such a different state. No one's gone through the same story. No one's gone through the same variables. And it's very hard to compare yourself to someone else's journey in a manner that I think it takes wisdom and discipline, and most of all, a really close relationship with God to look at someone else's journey and to extrapolate information and wisdom from it to apply in your life, because where God has you is unique to where he has you in your journey. And therefore, you can't just take something and then transplant it on your own foundation of where God has you and then expect good results, because it's not a straight correlation like that. It doesn't work like that. And so I agree where see, when Sharice here, she's saying her plans work best when you have buy-in. Buy-in comes from where you are a part of the plan. I agree with plans working best when you have a buy-in. Buy-in comes from when you are a part of the plan. When we create a plan, submit it to God, and adjust as needed. I would agree with that. And I think that sometimes we're living inside of plans that we don't even know are happening all the time. I would say we always are. Like if you believe God to be as big as it states that he is in the Bible, and most of the time it doesn't make sense, and it can be pretty maddening, right? Like we've seen in the story with Isaac, how his wells just keep getting messed with. Him trying to follow the calling that God has given his family, not only him, but his family, and him taking the steps that his father took. It's bringing about volatility and malevolence and hazards into his life by him doing the right thing. And he just had to keep moving and keep going until finally God gave him a place where he had this moment of clarity, and he's like, God's given us room because nothing bad is happening yet, right? And then right after that, he builds an altar, like I was saying. And then after that, Abimelech, who told Isaac to go away initially because he's growing too big. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Where is it at? Oh, oh yeah, he did tell him to go away because he was getting too big. I'm pretty sure if memory serves me right. It says Abimelech had come to him from Gerar with Ahazeth, his personal advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his forces. Verse 27, it said, Isaac asked him, Why have you come to me, since you were hostile to me and sent me away? And Abimelech answered, We saw clearly that the Lord was with you, so we said there ought to be a sworn agreement between us and you. Let us make a treaty with you that you will do us no harm, just as we did not molest you, but always treated you well and sent you away in peace. And now you are blessed by the Lord. And that probably speaks to Isaac handling the situation peacefully, right? Because if he would have revolted against Abimelech, let's say, the scenario would probably not been presented to him in that manner. It would have been different. And I think Isaac obeying God's commands and doing it his way lent to God bringing Abimelech there and making a peace treaty between them. And it kind of like buried the hatchet, so to speak, between them. And that could have been something that Isaac would have been worrying about, or could have been worried about, or maybe he held a grudge against. I'm guessing that he probably didn't, because God honored him in such a manner that, he dealt with all this adversity over and over again. And God's like, since you did that, you carried your cross, so to speak, right? If we would look at it in a comparative manner to how Jesus carried out his calling, he did what he was instructed to do, and he dealt with the adversity with wisdom and with discipline and with courage. He didn't freak out. He trusted the Lord, and God ended up blessing him in a manner that probably surprised him, you would think. And I think it's super important, again, that that it happened after he built the altar. Like, he took time to stop and to worship God in the middle of his journey, when it probably didn't, theoretically make sense at all. And that happened with Abraham too, and Isaac earlier in the story, I'm pretty sure, if my memory serves me right. He stops in the middle of the journey. After every time something good happens, he stops and builds an altar, takes his time and worships God and thanks him for what he's done, essentially. And he reveres the enormity of who God is and what he is and how good he is, because no matter what we do, we can never deserve any of the goodness that God gives us. And it's especially hard when, man, we live in a culture today where people are really searching for purpose, and they want to be, a good person, which, well, most people want to be a good person, and they're doing what they believe is right, joining movements that they believe are fighting the opposition that they deem is malevolent or not good for the culture or people. And it's real easy to sort of trick yourself into following something that may not be adequately proper for you in your life, but you can tell yourself a story that I am fighting the good fight, and I'm thinking of things that are bigger than myself, and I am sacrificing my time for something that is the greater good, when it could be a path that God hadn't intended for you at all. We can actually start idolizing and worship an earthly positivity, if that makes sense. And it's so easy to do. And I think it goes on to sort of enacting things that God really didn't necessarily create you to do, but the things that you're good at, or things that people have kind of given you. And that's a really hard conversation to have with yourself, because you can say, well, if I wasn't supposed to do it, why'd God allow it to just come into my lap? Which is a great question. I don't know. And I think everything kind of points back to having a relationship with God, like an awareness that he's here in the present, he's here in the now, and he's with you in all you do. Because If you think about just how you interact with the world and go about your day, think about all the little things you do, all your little idiosyncrasies, like, you know, stuff that, well, if anyone has ever had a roommate or ever became roommates with their best friend, for instance, in an apartment, everyone knows, well, most people know that sometimes that can result in things that they did not expect that they don't deem as being positive, right? You can start to be annoyed with your best friend if you live with them because of all these little idiosyncrasies that you carry out in your life. And you think about that. Think about that difference of what it is to be a best friend with someone and then to live with them. Now think about the difference of living your life the way you do now with someone not beside you all the time. Now think about all those moments, let's say in a day, for example, and what you would do and how you would interact with the events that roll out before you if you had someone right beside you. Like if you took someone with you to work or you took someone with you everywhere. That wasn't like a child but had actual influence on you, I would suppose, is probably a better example. Children do too, obviously, but you do things differently based on, someone being with you, right? Now, what would you do if you came into situations and you knew that God was like physically with you all the time? You'd probably interact completely differently. Completely different, like you would. We all would. Like if we had this deity beside us and we knew this deity created the earth, I mean, you'd probably be on your best behavior, mind your P's and Q's or something. Or maybe, I guess, if you're so resentful of the world, maybe you'd be mad at them. But you would act either way, you'd act differently. And hey, thank you, Andreas. I appreciate you. Hey, thank you very much. Yeah, my schedule's kind of all over the place. It kind of goes with my job as a software developer. And I appreciate you coming in here. I appreciate that. If there's a time that people like me going live better, put it in the comments. That'd be sick. But as I was saying, it's like if we can just be cognizant of God like actually being here, and I think that comes from having the closeness in the relationship, like I don't know if intimacy is the correct word, but the enormity of it and how much it actually affects everything. And the only way I've been able to really come to a place where I'm closer to God now than in any previous state of my life is by shutting everything off and just being with him. And sometimes as someone that is really big into being productive, getting a lot of stuff done in a day, blah, 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 all the motivational stuff that you hear on social media and TikTok or wherever the hell else, stuff that is actually good, right? Because you need a format of structure in your life in order to get anything done, usually. And it's hard to just shut things off and to work on a relationship with someone that you can't physically see. I don't know if I've ever heard a pastor say that before or even touch on it ever. But that is hard. Like, it's just hard. Like, pastors talk all the time about how grow your relationship with God and all this. It's like, it's easy as a kid to have an imaginary friend. And that's why in the Bible it's spoken to as like childlike faith and whatnot, which, and I didn't even previously think about this. God just popped this up in my head. It's actually that's an interesting thought to think about. But it is hard to have an imaginary friend when you're older. And therefore, it's harder to have a relationship with someone that isn't physically there, that you actually believe is to be there, truthfully, in a manner that you don't quite comprehend nor grasp. But if you believe it's true and it exists, that's hard. It's not easy. Like everything around you is telling you to interact with it in another manner until you get the relationship with God in a way where you view everything as like his, from an artistic standpoint, like palette that he's like creating art upon, right? And I find that part easy, actually. I'm good with relationships and friendships, so I treat God like an orphan. I talk to him all the time. I'm intentional with talking to him, with him, to him like with friends. Yep. So I think that's good. But I do think it's hard because I think it's hard for most people out there because it is. It's like you see all this chaos in the world. We look at things that happened to us in our previous lives. I mean, not previous life, but in the past. And you're like, why that happen? And it's hard to justify things in our head that people have done to us or that we have done to ourselves. And it's hard to grow that relationship with someone that isn't physically there because, to bring this full circle, you interact with the world differently if someone's right beside you. And so it's hard to interact in the manner that is proper in accordance to the person that isn't physically right beside me, but we know we should if he's there. And that's also interesting because I guess people have like mentors, right? I call mine like digital mentors. Are like, what would this person do in this scenario, right? Like if someone, think about like a David Goggins who runs like 15 miles a day or whatever, or in my own instance, be like Jocko Willink or like a Jordan Peterson or whatnot. How would they look at this scenario? And like it's easy to run that play, but if they were physically there beside me, I'd probably interact with scenarios completely different. And so I think it's hard. It's really hard. I really think it's hard to interact with the world with. It is hard to keep your actions congruent with how God wants you to without him physically there. And that's a whole mechanic. That's the whole mechanism behind faith, right? Is believing in the things unseen. Because I think it builds your character and manner in a manner that you can't attain otherwise, right? Because it is easier when someone's right beside you all the time. And that's why the act of Isaac building the altar is so like prevalent. I think that's why we see that same type of, sacrificial act of sacrificing his time to worship God after he blesses him or before he blesses him. It's honored by God. It's a big deal. It's obviously a big deal, or else it wouldn't be in the Bible. And it's difficult to do. Some of my closest relationships are with people I've met online. If you have an internet bestie that lives in another country, you work hard to build that relationship, even though they aren't here with me. That's true. So, it's true. And it's also, but even in that case, it's really hard it's hard to build relationships. It is. In life, just period. It is. Because it takes time, because we can't really discern truly if, let's say, we want to live the best life possible and we want to live in the manner that God is going to do through us whatever he created us to do. Now, in some places in the Bible, you have people like Moses, for instance. You read his story, it kind of looks like he sacrificed having a great family life or being close with his family to bring out the Israelites out of Egypt. It looks like he sacrificed a lot for his calling, which I don't know what I think about. It would take me probably a couple hours to talk about it. But in that case, it's like he sacrificed some human relationship for his relationship with God. And that's really hard to gauge how much you should. And it is like, I don't care who you are. It's different. Receiving positive interaction from people that you physically know reside on the earth is different than what you receive from God. It's different and it feels different. It's not the same mechanic behind it all. Psychologically, it's not at all. At all. And it's hard to really grasp that or wrap my mind around it because belief's really powerful in a manner of, well, you can believe in stuff so much that it doesn't really matter if it's true or not. You can act on it and act in a manner that can have extreme consequence, whether good or bad, in the world, right? Like, let's say if someone falls into the pit of depression, which then evolves into resentment, and then that evolves into wanting to take about vengeance upon the earth. Let's say they were bullied in school, then they go shoot up their school. It's like that cycle. They believe that the world is so bad and so wrong that it is irredeemable. And, well, maybe in that point, they don't even care if it's redeemed or not, but they want to take action and they have actual consequence on the physical realm. And that belief was so powerful, it drew them to things that were just absolutely asinine, right? And so when you fall down that, it's interesting to think about because people have been imprisoned during war times and gotten through it and got out. There was nothing to keep them going physically beside them. But it's hard to get to that place and develop it there with no one there beside you but yourself. Sometimes you're put into a scenario where you have no choice but to believe. It's either believe or die. Believe or be sad, or believe or X or Y, whatever you want to do. Spending time with them, communicating prayer. The main differences would be the worship aspect and putting your faith in God versus people. Yeah. But you go about the same actions to cultivate the relationship. For example, I agree that there are actions that you take that are very similar in growing the relationship with people and God. There are. Time is a big one, right? But it's also the biggest thing for me is just being cognizant of him actually being here. Like, it's really hard I think it is hard to develop the skill to be fully in something. Like, let's say I'm coding a program and I'm fully in it, right? Or I'm thinking about some philosophical idea and I'm really trying to wrap my mind around it, or some psychological idea, and I'm trying to figure out, how does this work, right? Maybe I'll be thinking about it while I'm doing art. So I got like two things already going on. I'm creating an art piece while thinking about some philosophical thing that some guy that like lived 300 years ago is doing. I'm doing those two things. And also at the same time, I got to be cognizant that God is steering my mind while not getting lost in the thing that I'm trying to find the treasure in, to a point where I shut God's guidance out. It's hard to develop that, and it's so hard. I mean, it's hard to find peace. It's hard to find peace in the world too, because, well, I guess technically you can't really find it in the world. Well, I don't know if you can find peace in the world, but it's not the same type of peace. And growing the relationship with God, it is hard. It's so hard. because there's so many things vying for our attention at all times. And it doesn't feel the same as someone next to you. Like, let's say my partner broke up with me and I have a best friend and they come over and bring me cookies and hug me. Like, that feels good, right? That's a lot different than my partner calling me on the phone, or not my friend calling me on the phone because I broke up with my partner. It's different. It's just different. It's completely different. It feels different. And then you extrapolate that, and the margin of difference is even greater when it comes to someone that you can't physically interact with, because your senses are we are conditioned to rely on our five senses from when we are born, right? We have many things in the world that teach us every day what we should do when we see things, hear things, touch things, smell things, right? Things of that manner. And it's like there are things giving us all information all the time in those senses, and it takes a different sort of intentionality to grow another sense, which would, you can call it sixth sense or like spiritual type sense, where you're believing something that is bigger than anything here on this dimension, right? Something that is like operating on this frequency, but kind of outside of it too. It's different. I mean, without operating on our five senses properly, we will coordinate with the world. We'll interface with it in a way that's improper, and it could cause us harm, right? Even from a little child, every day, your parents teach you things like how to eat with a spoon or whatnot, right? For example, how to walk. And so it's, and the amount of time that they pour into you in that manner, or just every day, if you think about how you interact with things with your five senses every day, think about the time that you're devoting into that versus the time that you're devoting into, say, a spiritual sense, right? It's different. And it's hard to rewire that in your head, I think. I think it's hard. And it's complicated because a lot of it happens on faith. It's like this big adventure you're having with this idea of truth, or this truth that you're pursuing, right? And you don't quite grasp the entirety of it at all. And maybe you never will before you die. And that's hard to come to terms with, but it's true. But just like Isaac here in the chapter 26 of Genesis, he had things happen to him that were improper. Things happened to him that he probably wouldn't have wanted to plan for. But he still kept going. And at the end of it, or at the end of this chapter anyway, God comes to him and blesses him. And God then takes the thing that kind of pushed him out of where he was, the territory where he was, the king Abimelech, and God brings that guy back to create a peace treaty with him in a physical sense. And God kind of closes that door, which I'm so grateful that God does that, because there's been so many times in my life where it's so crazy. Just yesterday, I ran into someone at my work's cafeteria that I hadn't seen in like 6 years when I first moved here to Omaha. And he hadn't seen me in a long time either. And there he is working at this cafeteria inside of the place where I'm at this tower that's in the city, right? And I think about the symbology of the job that I have now and what it meant for me along my journey and how to get there. So I remember all the days that when I left my previous job with nothing lined up because I felt God calling me to. And I remember all the days that I cried on my bed because I kept going to interviews, kept going to And in the programming world, when you interview for a new job, you usually have to take a test, like a programming test. It's not like another interview where they test you on your personality and how good you are with conversation and your social skills, right? You can get really far. If you are good at conversation, and I'll just say it, if you're good at manipulating people or good at moving people in a direction you want conversationally and can really work a crowd, I guess, for lack of better terms, you can do things in interviews where if you're tested in a manner like in the programming world, you can't maneuver your way through that in the same manner. So I remember going after interview and just like getting denied and just like crying on my bed, like, God, are you ever going to give me a job? And so he brought me to the job I have now, which is like my dream job. And I'm in this cafeteria at that place where God brought me. And I see this guy that he's known me since, I first moved here. Like before I did that real, I don't know, I would say religious escapade, I suppose. That was like when I got really near to God. And that was the onset of all this years ago. And I'm looking at him. I'm like, hey, man, how you been? He didn't recognize me at first. He kind of did a double take. He's like, hey, I'm doing good. I'm still doing music and all that stuff because he knew that, I did bands and I was a vocalist, death metal band, and I play music and whatnot. See the bass guitar in the background there. And we're talking because he's a cook there now or whatever he is, chef. I don't know what the hell they call him. But he's like, I'm still doing music, still doing XYZ or whatnot. I've been good. And he asked me what I've been up to. And I was like, I named some things off. And then at the end of it, I was like a lead class at church. And I didn't even tell him that I do videos on YouTube because I don't really view this as, I don't know why I didn't mention that, but I really struggled with what have you been up to? And then it really kind of encapsulated like how much God has done in my life in the past like 5 years. It is absolutely insane. Like that really hit me hard yesterday after that conversation. Because I couldn't encapsulate it all. And even points. I was like, I can't do that. It's like I competed in Muay Thai for a while. I fought some people for a while, in martial arts. I got really close to God. I got a programming job here. I'm a programmer. And I've just done so much. God has blessed me so much in the past 5 years that it's hard for me to really encapsulate that. And even words, how much he's done for me. It's absolutely insane. And it blows my mind all the time. All the time I'm thinking, I went from being unemployed to having the job I have now. And now I don't really have to worry about anything at all financially. And the doors open for me there all the time. And I'm like extremely driven to acquire knowledge and pursue truth and just get better and build my skills with things. And God put me in the exact place where I need to be with the exact people that I needed to be with, just like here with, Isaac and Abimelech. Like you had the negative circumstance arise in my life for me to leave my previous job to come where I am now. And seeing that dude yesterday that I hadn't seen in like 6 years, like brought it all up. I was like, that's a long time, man. It's been a long time. I can't even explain to you how much has happened. Because you take that for granted all the time. I would encourage you not to take that for granted. People say that all the time. It's really hard. It's really hard. And God's so good. And I remember I went to my desk and I was just like, thank you, God. That's such a good reminder, which I do remind myself all the time. And I spend time with God a lot, and a lot of alone time, maybe too much alone time. I don't know. But the one thing that has made me just happier is to intentionally seek the relationship that God has specifically for me, despite all these other external things vying for my attention, even the things that God calls me to, right? You can worship the thing that God called you to do in a way that'll take away from the relationship that He has with you. And that's easy to do. I've done it before, I'm pretty sure. I think everyone has that has a calling one time or another. And God's so good. He's so good. And, this last verse here, verse 32, it says, that day it's not the very last verse. The very last verse is when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith. But verse 32 here says, that day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well they had dug. We found water, and he called it Sheba. And to this day, the name of the town is Beersheba. And that happened right after Abimelech came and made this peace treaty with Isaac, which again, just as to wrap it all up, Isaac had to move from there because he was like, the people there were becoming envy of his resources, right? The way that God was blessing him. And so God kind of wrapped all this up and put like a bow on the gift by producing water out of a well that he dug. And that's so good. And it just goes to show, like, if you can get through the things that are really harmful to you or distracting to you and keep your faith in God to a point where you're able to stop everything and seek Him in relationship and to put things aside in a manner that doesn't really make any earthly sense, and to keep Him first and your relationship with Him first, and remember the sacrificial act of Jesus on the cross and what that means for us, and what His example of interfacing with the world, what that means to us, like Him carrying that cross. It wasn't pretty, but it was proper. And if we can shift our perspective on what the correct way is to live in this world, God will make it all worth it in the end. He will make it all worth it in the end. God's so good. I'm going to end there. He's so good, dude. So I hope you got something out of that. And let me know what you think. And where are you at in your journey? Shri says, I guess it depends on how you tap into the spiritual sense. If you are living in the Spirit, walking in the Spirit, it's not something you are switching into. I would agree with that. And at the same time, I also think that even living in a spiritual sense, I mean, if you look at it in a way, if you look at it in a manner, there's like levels to it. Like it has so much a percentile of your attention. I'm like 50% cognitive or 50% cognizant of the fact that God's with me right now. Like there's times when that goes down or up. So I think that's what I would mean by switching to it is, I mean, there's times when stress like overrides our thinking. It's like how we're wired psychologically. There's times that, we're biologically wired to and neurologically wired to just like react to certain things in the world. And it takes a discipline and a sort of faith to kind of interact with the world while being cognizant of God being here with you all the time, presently. And that's what I mean by that. So yeah, I love you all. I had a This is a great discussion. I hope it was good for you. As good for you as it was for me. I love you all, and I'm gonna get out of here. I'll be back on Monday, maybe Sunday, maybe Saturday. I don't know. We'll see. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. If you did watch to the end of this, if you want to subscribe and like, you can. If not, that's cool too. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me at any of the social media outlets that I put in the description or the comments and whatnot. I love you. And most of all, I hope that your relationship with God grows and that you attain the truth in your life that you're seeking, and it brings you peace. I am still alive, Sharice, and I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you all that came. I love you. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk soon. See you later.